Examine socialism further. My name is Donna Clement Petrushka. I'm the daughter of the late Kim Clement, and today you are watching a special Codebreakers in part 2 on the subject of socialism. In part 1, we looked back at the history of socialism, starting with a man named Robert Owen in the early 1800s and the failure of the New Harmony experiment. We also looked at Marxism and communism, examined the differences and similarities between socialism and communism, recognizing that a lot of this history is no longer taught in schools, which makes the new generation vulnerable to accepting ideas that they don't have a full understanding and grasp of. There are many versions and attempts at applying socialism to different countries and societies, but they have never worked. Most importantly to me is the fact that back in 2011, my father prophesied that they will not implement socialism or make history without God, which is ultimately what a socialist system is attempting to do, regardless of the different names they attach to it. In today's version, they have named it democratic socialism, which implies that if you vote for it, it's not force. And I showed you in part 1 of this series, thanks to a very informative speech by Ben Shapiro, that the fact that you are manipulated into voting for something doesn't take away the force involved. In part 1, we looked back at the past and the history of socialism. Today, we're going to look around us at the present. Socialism is on the rise again, and it is beginning to affect our laws and the motives of politicians who are running on a socialist platform. Now, before going any further, let's watch this short video clip that sums up socialism.
A lot of people are talking about socialism these days. Why? Many people believe it will make our country better. Why? Because socialism claims to be more compassionate. It promises greater equality between the powerful and the powerless, and more wealth for the working class. But how does socialism go about actually fulfilling its promise? In the last 10 decades, we've seen nearly 40 countries across the world experience socialism. And in each of these countries, we see the same practices consistently repeated. We see socialist governments seizing control of private property. We see socialist governments seizing control of the entire economy, from the smallest street vendors to the biggest businesses. We see governmental control of healthcare and education, literally our bodies and our minds. We see basic freedoms disappear, like freedom of speech and freedom of religion. We see some of the worst human rights abuses known to history. Over and over again, we see socialist governments abusing the lives and rights of citizens in their efforts to create equality. So, has socialism ever succeeded in its promise of greater equality? When the Bolshevik Party seized power in Russia, it took possession of everything: land, buildings, products. The government dictated your profession, and the politically powerful hoarded the best jobs. Permission from the government was required to change jobs or move to a new house. Anyone who resisted socialism, from petty criminals to political dissidents, was sent to the hellish Gulag prisons. And despite the Soviet Union's staggering production of missiles and tanks, there were constant food shortages, and every other facet of the planned economy failed. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Today, Cuba is the clearest picture of modern socialism. Fidel Castro seized all private property after taking power in 1959. Cuba proudly touts free healthcare for everyone, but the reality is that only the most politically well-connected receive quality care, and many minorities are denied basic medical treatment. There's also a maximum wage, which means even doctors only earn 38 cents an hour. And while Cuba has an impressive literacy rate, most of the reading is limited to party propaganda, as free speech and independent media are banned. Meanwhile, anyone who opposes the government is harassed, detained, kept from their families, and often brutally beaten. Socialism has proven time and time again that it cannot deliver on its promises. Instead of creating greater equality and a better life for all, socialism has always resulted in failed economies, police states, and great loss of life. The reality of socialism does not match the picture in our minds. These are not the results we want. So the question we must ask is socialism truly the best way to pursue greater equality and prosperity?
In part one, I played a clip for you of Ben Shapiro, who analyzed the basics of socialism and how it breaks down the prosperity God gives to not only nations, but to families, and how socialism starves to death and ultimately refuses even basic medical assistance to the poor, who they initially convinced to vote for it. Let's watch the rest of that speech now, where Ben delves deeper into the countries like Venezuela and in Europe, and the truth of what is happening in regards to socialism using the prosperity of free nations to turn them into dark, controlled police states. Its first victims are always the poor, the needy, the handicapped, the ones who were tricked into supporting its sales pitches the most.
Socialists do this all the time. Okay, we tried the USSR experiment. It only ended with tens of millions of people dead and millions more people imprisoned in gulags and tremendous suffering for nearly a century. Other than that, it was great. Right? Venezuela was not really trying it, right? I mean, the full-scale nationalization of the oil industry and the decision to nationalize other key industries and to stack those key industries with cronies of the political party in power, and then to inflate the currency to insane numbers and lift tariffs in order to avoid dependency theory. None of that was real socialism. Real socialism is unicorns and rainbows. Real socialism is gumdrops. Real socialism has never been tried. Again, if you believe this, you're a fool. Cuba says it's not socialist. Cuba knows it's socialist. Right? Socialist countries know they're socialist because they say they're socialist. But it's so funny. The same people who will say that a country that declares itself democratic is therefore democratic will not admit that a country that self-identifies as socialist is socialist. If you're a country that self-identifies as socialist, then we will determine whether or not you're socialist depending on whether your country sucks or not. Okay, the fifth claim the democratic socialists make, and this is the one that you're going to hear the most often, is that what real democratic socialism is, it's not Venezuela, it's not Cuba, it's not the USSR, it's Norway. Norway's their favorite one these days, right? It was Denmark a few years ago, and then Denmark had an economic collapse and elected a right-wing government. But now it's Norway. Norway is just awesome. As I say, even the Prime Minister of Denmark started objecting to this. In 2015, Bernie Sanders was going around talking about how Denmark was just the best place ever. I guess that was another place he wanted to mooch off a commune and then get kicked out. And the Danish Prime Minister went to Harvard Kennedy School of Government and he said, quote, "I know that some people in the US associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy." Okay, which is true. If you look at the Heritage Foundation ranking of economic freedom, what you will find is that the United States is ranked 18th. Ranked above the United States in economic freedom, according to the Heritage Foundation, right? Good conservative folks. Okay, ranked above them. Denmark is ranked 12th. Switzerland is ranked 4th. Sweden is ranked 15th. The Netherlands is ranked 17th. So all of the Nordic countries that the left likes to proclaim are socialist are, in fact, actually capitalist, meaning they have low regulation, and they have free trade, and they are great places to invest your money. Right? All of these places are prosperous because of capitalism, and the economic problems that they have had are largely attributable to the giant welfare states that they've built on the back of capitalism. The truth about using socialist systems on top of capitalism is that capitalism creates the strength, and then socialism freezes things in place and redistributes everything, which inevitably tends to suck the strength out of the system. Right? You have a growing system that is really bursting at the seams with potential, and then people say, well, we're rich enough, let's redistribute all the gains. So they do that, they redistribute all the gains, and then it turns out that people don't have as much of an incentive to work anymore. And this is why you've seen, for example, there have been some experiments. There's one that was shut down literally today in Canada, I think it was in Ontario. They had a universal basic income experiment in Ontario. They shut it down today because it turned out that when you give people a lot of money to stay home and do nothing, they stay home and do nothing. The truth is that all of these countries became wealthy long before they started using all of these socialist methodologies. Also, they became wealthy because they have pretty good cultures there, right? They have high social cohesion in a lot of these Nordic cultures and cultural homogeneity, including a particular focus on work ethic, right? Culture does make a difference in all across the world. Culture makes a difference in how people act differently. And Nordic populations transplanted to the United States actually do better in the United States than they did back in their home countries. So if it was the system in Norway that made people successful, then why is it that when Norwegians come to the United States, they earn more? Right? When Swedish folks come to the United States, when Swedish Americans become Swedish Americans, they actually earn more on average than if they'd stayed home in Sweden. Sweden, which is a supposed socialist paradise, it grew because of capitalism. According to an economic scholar named Nima Zanandanji, who's actually from Norway, between 1870 and 1936, Sweden enjoyed the highest growth rate in the industrialized world. But between 1936 and 2008, the growth rate was only 13th out of 28 industrialized nations. And that is because they started implementing what they called third-way socialism. It was a complete fail, and then they had to elect more right-wing governments to try and walk all of that back. Right? The real question when you look at these states is how much of these socialist programs can you place atop the capitalist superstructure? And the answer is some, but not in an eternal amount. You can't just pile it on. You can't pile an infinite amount of socialism on top of a structure of capitalism and hope the structure of capitalism holds. That's not how it works. It's also important to note that even if you believe that some of these socialist programs work in places like Norway, even if you really like Norway's education system, for example, the idea that you can extrapolate from Norway to the United States is one of the weirder ideas, of people who promote public policy. Norway is a country whose total population is 5.23 million people. I live in Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County is 10.2 million people. Los Angeles County is twice the size of Norway. Okay, you can't actually take something that is somewhat working in a culturally homogenous area, which, by the way, is actually breaking down, because what you're seeing is that all of these socialist economies have created welfare states that are not sustainable with the populations they have. This has caused them to bring in a lot of low-wage immigration from abroad, and this is creating high levels of unemployment among those specific immigrants. The employment rate among immigrants to the United States significantly higher than the employment rate for immigrants to Norway, and it's creating all sorts of cultural conflict in places like Norway and in places like Sweden, which is why you're seeing all this anti-immigrant sentiment in these socialist states. They created these socialist welfare states. They brought in a bunch of immigrants to fuel those socialist welfare states. They didn't assimilate any of those people. And then there's all sorts of cultural conflict that is happening because of this.
This is reality. And as I watch and read the news, I'm seeing the reality of our predicament slowly rearing its head into ridiculous laws that merge with policies that are beginning to affect us. California's Proposition 47 is a prime example of that. In California, the National Review released an article in which, and I quote, Proposition 47 downgraded a variety of non-serious, non-violent crimes that had previously been considered felonies to misdemeanors. These include shoplifting, grand theft, receiving stolen property, forgery, fraud, and writing bad checks. As long as the total value of the stolen property is under $950, only a ghost of an offense has occurred. A thief may now steal something under that limit on a daily basis, and it will never rise to felony status. Yet, in the same state, USA Today reports that plastic straws are being banned in California, with a $1,000 fine and possible jail time. So in a nutshell, it has become more of an offense to use a plastic straw than to steal. And in no way am I trying to say that I don't care about what we are doing to our oceans. I do agree that we need to be proactive in cleaning up our oceans. But the scales are tipped in the wrong direction if that takes precedence over crime and theft. As California continues to pass these laws, the conditions in San Francisco especially are astounding. I just read an article in the San Francisco Chronicle entitled Poop, Needles, Rats, Homeless Camp Pushes San Francisco Neighborhood to the Edge, in which residents are overwhelmed with the rise in homelessness and the conditions in their neighborhoods that are increasingly dangerous and filthy in a city that is one of the most expensive to live in the world. I found another article where poop patrollers earn up to $185,000 a year picking up feces in the streets of San Francisco. The homelessness epidemic in cities like San Francisco, Portland, New York, Seattle, and Los Angeles has resulted in streets filled with urine, feces, drug needles, and violence in the streets. When looking at America and then the rest of the world, the rise in socialist ideology is beginning to manifest worse, not better results. In Canada, the laws regarding the pronouns used for gender have gone beyond reason, in my opinion. This is a law that tells you what words you are required to use when referring to gender, regardless of whether the person who has committed the offense of calling a person by the wrong term even knows that they've used the wrong term. An article I recently read in Patriot Pages recounts a story of this very thing happening. It says, since the passing of the bill, people can be accused of a hate crime and be fined or even serve jail time for using the wrong gender pronoun. Someone with positive intentions could accidentally call someone by the wrong pronoun and could be accused of something as serious as a hate crime. Cases of this are already occurring in Canada. For example, a teacher was suspended and faces a disciplinary hearing for calling a transgender student a girl instead of a boy. The teacher claims that she was not given instruction for what pronoun to refer to the student as, but because of the bill, that teacher can face gender-based harassment and could be fired. There are many different opinions on this subject, and now people are talking about whether or not this law should be implemented in the United States. In Venezuela, the conditions under socialism have gotten to the point where there is now a shortage of toilet paper. And Finland's universal income experiment will end in 2019. They had experimented with payouts that were designed to support unemployed citizens while encouraging them to find work, but this system has failed. The most ridiculous laws I've found so far are in an article entitled "Ridiculous EU Rules That Britain Has to Adhere to," where there are bans and limits on things you would never expect. Balloons, bananas, toasters, light bulbs, and even tea and pet horses. I'm showing you all of this because I was shocked as I delved deeper into the state of the laws worldwide that are beginning to emerge alongside the rise in socialist ideology, and the argument, once again, that we'll get it right this time. We are currently seeing an alarming and increasing rise in democratic socialism, yet there seems to be more confusion and restriction than the freedom and compassion that encompasses the narrative. Watch this news clip with Tucker Carlson and what he has to say about this.
You've heard the phrase a lot lately, democratic socialist. It's suddenly very common on the left. Bernie Sanders has called himself a democratic socialist. So has New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's the woman that the DNC chair, Tom Perez, recently said this about.
She represents the future of our party. Alexandria's victory was just a remarkable reminder of the depth that we have in the Democratic Party.
Okay, so democratic socialism is the future, but what is democratic socialism? We thought it'd be worth pausing for a minute to find out. Democratic socialism is not, by the way, a wing of the Democratic Party, at least not yet. It's an entirely separate movement with its own national organization, the Democratic Socialists of America. 2 years ago, the DSA endorsed Bernie Sanders and opposed Donald Trump, but did not endorse Hillary Clinton. So at times, it has been antagonistic to the Democratic Party. What do democratic socialists believe? There's no formal platform, but the outlines are pretty clear. Democratic socialists support socialism, state ownership of major industries. That would include healthcare, technology, manufacturing. Some of them explicitly support communism. The co-chair of Portland, Oregon's chapter of the DSA recently tweeted this, quote, "As a DSA chapter co-chair, I just want to set the record straight for a minute. Communism is good." But democratic socialism is about more than economics. The DSA's official Twitter account demands reparations for African Americans in the form of free and open enrollment at public colleges, retroactive forgiveness of student loans, and a guaranteed lifetime minimum income. The DSA has also called for an end to all immigrant deportations everywhere in the United States. In New York, the DSA has demanded the abolition of profits, prisons, cash bail, and borders. Not all democratic socialists have the same views on everything, but that gives you some idea. Unlimited, uncontrolled immigration into the U.S., coupled with race-based reparations, the abolition of prisons, and by extension, law and order itself, and a massive expansion of the welfare state financed by an economic system that does not recognize profit. How would that work exactly? Has it ever worked in any country in the world? Those suddenly seem like relevant questions. At this pace, a democratic socialist could get the Democratic nomination at some point and be elected president.
Another trend we're seeing is the increasing number of celebrities who are suddenly jumping on the bandwagon to advocate for socialism. Watch this clip of Cynthia Nixon, an actress from the TV show Sex and the City, who was running for governor of New York.
I am proud to be one of a small but growing number of candidates to identify as a democratic socialist. I hadn't called myself a democratic socialist before, but I realized that my values and what I'm fighting for are directly aligned with that movement. So, if being a democratic socialist means believing that health care and housing and education should be a human right, then I am a democratic socialist. against inequality in all its forms and taking action to equalize wealth and power in our society, then I am a democratic socialist. The establishment is terrified of that word, socialism. But if we learned one thing from the Obama years, it's that Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what we do. So we might as well give them the real thing.
Many political candidates are emerging with this same message. By playing on the sympathy of the public, they feed us the rhetoric that sounds compassionate, but are hiding the horrors behind what these things actually mean. Other candidates running for political office intend to enact laws that are, by definition, socialist. Gavin Newsom, who is running for governor of California, endorses health care for everyone, including illegal immigrants. Bernie Sanders plans to run for president again in 2020. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is running for Congress in New York. Ayanna Pressley for Congress in Massachusetts. Andrew Gillum is running for governor of Florida, and there are many more. The policies they are promoting and running on are more rights for illegal immigrants and abolishing ICE, as well as opening our borders. I am an immigrant. My family are immigrants. And we followed the law and went through the entire process legally to become citizens. It means a lot to us, and we worked very hard to earn that. And although we obviously have compassion for the desperate and needy in the world, it is not fair to those of us who went the legal route to suddenly see the borders that protect all Americans become worthless. Another policy that they're promoting is universal income, which includes supremely high taxes for the wealthy, as much as 80% or more, forgetting that it is the wealthy who have the businesses that create jobs for everyone else. This is a prime example of the equal distribution of wealth in a country that is extremely large. Without an incentive to work, just as what happened in New Harmony, eventually things will become run down and there will no longer be the drive for destiny. That is the core of the dangerous territory we are entering into when playing with the idea of socialism. The danger is that we lose our individual desire for destiny and growth when we are no longer given incentive to strive for those things. Socialism blankets us all and steals our individual potential. They also promote policies that limit our free speech under the guise of compassion, when it becomes law to not only tell us what we are not allowed to say, but what we have to say will ultimately steal free speech from us. No matter how horrible something someone says is, taking away the freedom to say those things hides who they really are. With free speech, we are able to identify the good guys from the bad guys. As I've said before, good and evil runs through the center of each of our hearts, and hiding evil does not get rid of it. Free speech ultimately works to our advantage as we navigate through life because we can clearly see danger. Big government is the ultimate plan, and the bigger the government, the more enslaved and dependent we will become on it. A lot of this boils down to the question of equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. To expect an equal outcome, regardless of whether it has been earned or not, will always result in failure. What we need is equality of opportunity. America gives that to us. No matter how low a point we start from, it is ultimately up to each individual person to climb as high as they can. If we have an equal opportunity, the rest is up to us. Thank you for joining me today for this special Codebreakers. If you haven't seen part 1 on socialism, I encourage you to go watch it, because I had a look back at the history of socialism, communism, and why such ideas were birthed, but also how they failed over and over again.